Texans introduced a new offensive coordinator this week, but their old one was in the news. It is the Locker Room #1 source for Texans digital content. This video brought to you by BetUS. Bobby Slowik. We were frustrated with Bobby Slowik. Bobby Slowik no longer with us, but the anonymous players, the team sources are kicking Bobby out the door.
Damn it, Bobby.
I think he deserves it, but I don't think he deserves all the brunt. We'll get to that in a sec. DJ Bieneme, ESPN. I've put the link to the entire story in the description. Strong recommendation to go read the whole thing. Having the written word of football alive and well is still a good thing, and DJ is one of the people that keeps that alive around here. However, I have gathered the quotes in the story, and I want to react to them because I think some of them are common sense, some of them are amusing for a number of reasons. We'll get to that. We'll start with the first anonymous quote in the story. Quote, "I just feel like we're putting a lot of pressure on him," a team source told ESPN. I think that's obvious. I don't know if it was all the offensive coaches, but CJ Stroud was literally, by definition, pressured as much more than any quarterback in the entire NFL. I don't think you have to be a team source to see that. I think you could be at a kegger watching the game. I think you could be someone who watches every snap. Anyone, you could be selling beers on the concourse. They were obviously putting a lot of pressure on CJ Stroud. Now, was it all Bobby Slowik's fault?
Damn it, Bobby.
I think this article would want you to believe that. I think the people who spoke in it would want you to believe that. But I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Next quote. We simply weren't good enough offensively. A team source told ESPN we had all season to make adjustments and improvements, and it never happened. I think this was one of Bobby Slowik's biggest flaws. I don't think that he had the personality to really lead a bunch of alphas. I think not being a position coach kind of shined a little bit. The adjustments were bad. It was kind of a low point when he minimized halftime adjustments. I thought that was strange. And we saw that throughout. The ability to make adjustments and improvements never happened. Now, I will say, once you lost Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs, and in fairness, it never looked great when those guys were in there as well. But once you lost them, I don't know how good the personnel was. I think the personnel may have been as much of an issue as the play calling. That doesn't mean you have to pick one or the other. Control what you can control. They might be handcuffed with some of this personnel, specifically on the offensive line, at least for another year or so. But I think it was probably harder for Bobby Slowik to make adjustments and improvements given the personnel that this offense had. Like, at no point did I sit there and say, you know what, Bobby Slowik's really holding back this offensive line. This can be one of the best offensive lines in the league if Bobby Slowik would just get the most of it. I didn't sit there and say, you know, Bobby Slowik is really holding back John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson. That's just me. You might have, not going to tell you what to think, but I didn't feel that way. I thought Bobby handcuffed the offense, and I thought he was handcuffed based on the personnel. Next quote from the story at ESPN.com. I don't think we had a true identity of what the bleep we wanted to do.
Damn it, Bobby.
One player told ESPN. Okay, what was the identity going to be? Especially like when Mixon was out and they had no receivers. What was the identity going to be? Nick Caley himself has said they're not going to have like one specific identity. He says that they're going to be week-to-week game plan type of thing. So sometimes identity is something you say when you have a crappy offense, and it's just something that is said and then it gets repeated. I don't know what the identity should have been. Sometimes I see teams and I say, okay, this should be a passing team. This should be a running team. Texans couldn't run the ball consistently, and they couldn't protect in the pass. So yes, I understand that you would, in a perfect world, you would like to be able to put your will on the defense and be able to implement whatever you want to do. I don't know that that was the case. I think this could be as much of a Bobby thing as a player thing. Here was another, this wasn't a team source quote. This is just kind of what DJ said in the article, but the lack of communication within those blocking plans versus stunts led to free rushers, which is why Stroud faced 52 unblocked pressures, which was second most in the NFL. So you can kind of see that this story is kind of talking about communication and unblocked. I'll say this. I watched every snap of this season. There were a lot of times where guys were just flat out getting their ass kicked. That, like, all the pressures were not a result of not knowing what they were doing. We also don't know whose fault it is that they don't know what they're doing. But there were times where they didn't know where to line up. There wasn't much accountability after the game in that regard from the offensive line. And there were a number, maybe as many as there were free pressures, where guys just flat out got their ass kicked mano a mano. So I think it's kind of fair to defend Bobby on that. That might be one thing, and hopefully you fix that. But there was also a problem with just lining up mano a mano and getting your ass kicked. Next quote from the ESPN story, DJ Bieniemy, and again, the description has the link in the video. Trusting Strausser's approach wasn't easy for some players either, according to a team source, as he struggled to connect with the offensive line. Struggled to connect with the offensive line. Don't know what that means. Chris Strausser's coached some good offensive lines. He's coached some offensive lines that have struggled. He struggled to connect. Okay. Is that his fault? Is that their fault? Again, I think there's personnel issues on this offensive line as well. So I don't think it's just all. I don't think Chris Strausser was coaching the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line. And the other thing is this. The Texans have invested more in their offensive line than the Eagles have theirs. They've invested as much as any other team in the league when it comes to draft equity and money. So maybe you got to try to maximize it. Again, I speak for me. I did not watch this offensive line and say, man, these guys are getting held back. I don't think Bobby helped them, but I didn't sit here. I think this is a misevaluation of personnel as much as Bobby Slowik. Don't know if you can change the personnel, though. Next quote from the story. We really just got to take what we're applying at practice to take it to the field. We are not doing that right now. Left guard Titus Howard told ESPN after the Week 9 loss to the Jets. So that was Titus Howard. That was a somewhat accountable quote from Titus Howard, basically saying that they knew what they were supposed to do. They just weren't applying it. That was just to be fair, a little bit of accountability from the offensive line. Now we got another team source in the story. One team source said Slowik overcomplicated reads, which didn't allow Stroud to play fast. That could be very true. They did seem confused at the line of scrimmage quite often. There were guys going in freely. I'm not going to dismiss that. I also think, though, that the wide receivers weren't getting open like you would like them to. And that can be as much of a personnel thing. Once you lost Tank Dell and Diggs and you were relying on Mechie and Hutchinson, that probably made it a little bit more difficult. Back to the team source quote. One team source said Slowik overcomplicated reads, which didn't allow Stroud to play fast. That's the same one that we just read. It was so nice. We read it twice. So these are the anonymous sources. I think you can probably try to follow the source and figure out who it is. I think the final quote, which is not a quote, kind of tells you where this information could perhaps be coming from. This was from DJ. This was one of the final sentences of the story. Quote, making the scheme less predictable and giving the line the tools to protect the quarterback will go a long way, helping the Texans take the next step. I would say replacing some of these offensive linemen would be nice too, but you can't always do that based on resources. So it's easy to say, damn it, Bobby, but I think damn it players is just as much of a thing. I think Bobby Slowik was not ideal, but I don't think this offensive line is ideal as well. Clearly, they didn't like what Bobby Slowik was doing. Quite frankly, that's what you have to hope. You have to hope that Bobby Slowik was the biggest problem possible, because that would be in the best interest of the Texans. And quite frankly, it would make the front office not look as silly for some of the investments they've made on the offensive line. But I do think it does need to be mentioned in the spirit of fairness that as much as there was a lot of, damn it, Bobby, there was also a lot of, hey, you just got your ass kicked lining up man to man. There was maybe one player that I looked at with Bobby Slowik and said, man, maybe they need to get this guy to eat a little bit more. It was Tank Dell before he went down with the injury. Other than that, I thought Bobby Slowik was just as handcuffed at times as perhaps that maybe he handcuffed some of the players, depending on what you read, what you believe, et cetera. Again, shout out to DJ Bieniemy for the piece. We'll see what happens. The Combine 9 days away. Myself, Cody Stutes, SNL, will be live in Indianapolis for that. And we got you covered, and we'll see how the Texans attack this. We'll see how Nick Caley handles it. But I'll say this, in the spirit of protecting, not necessarily protecting, but at least seeing both sides of this Bobby Slowik thing, and Nick Caley has to work with what Bobby Slowik had to work with on that offensive line and on the outside of Nico Collins, it's not going to be a great offense. I can promise you that. They got a lot of work to do, and they got to figure it out. It's definitely damn it Bobby, but it's also damn it players. Shout out to BetUS for sponsoring the segment. Get 150% bonus up to $2,000. Promo code YouTube150. And always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. Shout out to DJ for the good journalism at ESPN.